want to thank you for coming to the session, creating solutions via the Copilot with plugins and message extensions. We tried to make the title a little bit longer, but we met into a limit. You have 3 presenters here today. I'm going to start off by introducing myself and have the rest of our presenters here introduce themselves. As you heard me ad lib a little bit before, we're part of the Microsoft product team. My name is Fabian Williams. I'm a senior product manager on the Microsoft Copilot extensibility CPX team. Again, trying to make it as long as possible, but it's AKA the Graph team. Because if you knew me from before, it's the Microsoft Graph team. It's just that our focus now is very positioned towards Microsoft Copilot, and in this context, Microsoft Copilot 365. Eunice?
Yep. Hi, everyone. My name is Eunice Lowe. I'm a product manager with Teams Engineering. My focus is on the Copilot extensibility and Teams platform space, and I cover plugins. Fabian and up next is Matt, are my partners in crime, where we talk about the extensibility in general. Matt?
As Fabian mentioned, I am on his team as well, the Copilot Extensibility Customer Partner Experience team. Again, kind of trying to interact with customers, partners, understanding their needs, where we fall short, and collecting that information and taking it forward. We also spend quite a bit of time helping customers and partners deploy these extensibility solutions in various different states and fashions.
I just want to give you a little bit of structure in terms of how we're going to do the presentation here today. As again, we have 3 presenters, but soon you're going to see me exit stage left. We're going to cover a little bit around just some grounding. Use grounding. That's a nice pun right there.
There you go.
On Copilot from Microsoft 365, Copilot from Microsoft 365 extensibility, plugins. Matt's going to do a plugin demo, and we have the super rock star of Eunice here today that's going to really take the baton. She's the anchor leg of all of this and talk about the architecture and everything else. Right? Exactly. Maybe.
Surprise.
Exactly. Surprise. I sat the session before, and I know this. Let me ask you a question. How many people here, and I'd be surprised to see the answer, is that this is the first time you're seeing this slide? Exactly, right? It's not the first time. But the idea, though, is, as comfortable as you'll hear me explain what this slide is, you guys are now become, basically the ambassadors when you go back to your work environment. You are our scale engine, and we want to ensure that when you're being asked, what is Copilot for Microsoft 365? You're going to say it exactly as how we say it. Maybe not, to the degree of a verbatim, but it is important to understand just how this framework is structured. Again, it is not anything surprising in terms of just how all of the companies out there are positioning themselves around LLMs, but a company such as Microsoft as well, where you have a tenancy and your data is inside a tenancy, and you have foundational models that you can, have chat completions, you can get summarization, it can accept prompts, rephrase things that you're doing. It's not a surprise that there's a foundational model that's built inside Microsoft Azure that is basically the lowest layer in the stack that your Microsoft data sits on top of to provide grounding and reasoning over. Surface inside the Microsoft 365 apps that your users are using, including yourself, right? It's not new terrain. The same apps that you're using now have Copilot built inside it. And obviously you can make it more relevant in terms of what the base model is by having it also tied to the internet optionally. So that's basically the structure of it. If anyone asks you and provide a quiz later on potentially in an end of this session, you can certainly answer that question. But I think it's important as well. I'm not sure if you've seen this one. This is one that actually I love to use because I'm a visual learner, and I also want to know what the hierarchy look like. I'm going to do one more thumb ahead. Our team actually presented 3 sessions. We have actually Cameron and Jeremy left, but that did a session earlier on. It was yesterday actually, around plugins. So that's basically the top of the stack. We had Brian, who actually just wrapped up a session here on Microsoft Graph Connectors that's roughly towards the bottom of the stack. And we at plugins is a little bit under the bottom. So again, the reinforcement is that this is all on the same trusted layer. In fact, we had a question in the last session about custom graph connectors in the context of search and using Azure AI Search and also using Azure AI Library. All part of the same infrastructure. It's all built in Microsoft Azure, and all of these things layer together. You'll see me talk a little bit later on is what to use when. But the takeaway here is that all of the things that we're talking about today is built on Microsoft Azure, part of the AI safety, the same place where the foundational models is, the same place that M365 also lives. We have Microsoft Graph Connectors, which is one of the lower layers. And then on top of that, we have our grounding engine. We manage the prompts there. And then above, in terms of allowing extensibility through plugins, is closer to the top of the stack. One way to think about this, is that, the purpose of this slide is showing you the x-axis where you have, graph connectors going one way, and then the y-axis where you have plugins. One of the major takeaway here is that plugins is just a great place for any data that is highly transactional. The data is something that is better consumed in real time, and you want to also perform actions on it in real time. So the key value there is to build solutions that will allow your end users to basically have a similar chat experience, but then within that chat experience also have a pane of glass, sometimes represented, or mostly represented in what am I looking for? An adaptive card that also has buttons that you're enabled to take action on as well. Another way to think about this, in terms of if you're comparing apples to apples, that this slide is trying to communicate over, is you may have scenarios that you're asking, what is going on around X? And take an action on Y. Within the context of Microsoft Graph Connectors and also plugins, you can certainly ask those questions about what to do, so on and so forth, because both of them can return information. The key differentiator in the second item below is actually taking an action on something, which is something that is more geared towards plugins in terms of that experience. Both Math and Unity are actually going to dive in a little bit more detail, so I'm not going to steal their thunder on that, but that's certainly a good call out. And again, if you think about it from a user experience perspective, the takeaway from this graphic is that your users are not seeing something that's new. The path to success is a low-hanging fruit. Within the same application UIs that they live in right now, there is a Copilot experience. You're going to use, however, plugins in terms of to take particular actions, what the users can do in terms of the skills. And at the layer below, tapping into other external systems is where you have your Microsoft Graph Connectors. Another way to think about this is your left, my right. You have basically, demarcations in terms of when to use Microsoft Graph Connectors and when to say plugins. A lot of words on this slide. I don't like to have slides with a lot of words. What I'm going to tell you is this. Oftentimes you think about this, it's not one or the other. Oftentimes it's where your investments are now versus also where you want to be. And I have people that are doing Jira, and they may do a Jira Graph Connector, because the scenarios that they're thinking about requires them to have that ingested data come inside, be indexed, and be available as a first-party citizen with M365 data. And at the same time, they may also want to take advantage of actions within the Jira system, and then a plugin comes inside there. So if you're doing something with message extensions already, you're already part of the way. I don't know what the percentage is, but you're part of the way there already. And then it's simpler to just invoke a little bit more in terms of the manifest and a couple of the items, and I'm going to steal their thunder, to light that up in terms of plugin. In Graph Connectors, if you're doing Graph Connectors, by the way, is not new. Part of the search experiences before that could be lit up in types of search or inside Harmony or inside the portal.office.com. Now we're just saying that now you can actually use natural language to make that happen. But I think with that, though, is when I end, don't I?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Exit state.
You stole my thunder.
I just still.
All right, so plugins, woohoo, right? In the kind of pre-session questions, I saw there was a handful of people that were doing plugins, and there was quite a bit more people doing message extensions. And so it is a little bit repetitive coming into kind of the setup for the actual demo that we're going to do, and hopefully that's where the real meat and potatoes will be in terms of kind of what we're interested in for this specific session. But plugins, as Fabian mentioned, is another great way to have Copilot actually act or interact with your information. But unlike message extensions, it's a real-time API request to some API somewhere, external data, wherever it happens to be. This is fantastic, as Fabian mentioned, for scenarios where the data needs to be available in real time. There's a handful of scenarios, and I'll kind of run through an example in a little bit that I think explains that really well. But that's one of the main benefits of this. But since it is API-based, we're not limited to just the ability to retrieve data, right? We can make other update requests via that API as well. When we build out that plugin via message extension, we have the ability to kind of dictate what the results are going to look like through an adaptive card. So that's fantastic. We can kind of structure it the way we want to. We can include pictures. We can do, essentially whatever you want that data to look like, you have control over it. Another part of that are the actions. So we add those actions directly into the adaptive card. So there'll be buttons at the bottom that allow you to, open up an external link, edit, comment on something, whatever it happens to be. And again, that's just calling the API in the background and making those requests. One thing kind of to point out is, as of now, Copilot doesn't actually support the actions natively through Copilot. So I can't prompt Copilot to go make the request for me. That's why those adaptive cards come in really handy for kind of the action perspective in all of this. Another kind of nice thing about plugins is your end users have access to basically find them through the Teams app catalog. Because of that, there's a lot of controls that we can put around it as well. So you can actually make sure that some people have access to plugins. You can deploy it to specific people. And that ends up being a really nice scenario as well as part of this. And kind of the final point that I believe Jeremy actually pointed it out in his session yesterday is the difference between API and graph connectors from a kind of compliance boundary standpoint is, graph connectors pulling that data within your compliance boundary, whereas plugins are making a request external. So more than anything, just kind of pointing that out as just a reminder as everything for everything. Moving along here, we really like this graph. Fabian, pointed out, talked about basically expanding Copilot by moving the scale one way or another on the graph. The plugin story is really that axis, excuse me. And by moving that, essentially what we're doing is we're giving your end users additional skills that they're able to utilize through Copilot. So just, additional abilities to prompt Copilot to do things for you. I like to kind of use a really super simple example to kind of walk through this, and I find that it does a pretty good job of kind of explaining the situation a little bit better. So, if you're a developer, or if we make it a little bit more realistic, Eunice is a developer. And she builds an application that does something like wind speed for a specific location. That is super useful information to Copilot because Copilot doesn't have any idea what the wind speed is of a specific location. It was grounded on pre-trained data and has access to your graph connector knowledge, right? But it doesn't have that real-time information. And so if she builds that and deploys it as a plugin within Copilot, and I, as an end user, I have kind of my intent. I've got this little small prop plane that I want to go fly around Orlando. Without having to really know about her app, I can go to Copilot and I can say, hey, Copilot, I'm hoping to go fly my little prop plane around Orlando this afternoon. Is that a good idea? And Copilot can basically take that prompt through its orchestration, identify the fact that there's a plugin that can help answer that question for me. It submits the API requests to her app that responds back and says, there's going to be 150 mile an hour winds today. I don't think that's a good idea. So, the important piece there is I can go to one spot, I can ask questions. Copilot is able to kind of interpret what I'm looking for and direct me where I maybe need to go. And that might be graph connected data, but in this case, it's a plugin because we're looking more for real-time, up-to-the-minute type data. Again, super simple example, but hopefully that kind of gets the wheels turning and you can kind of see how that would fit into your line of business type application. The development story, I think, is kind of one of the main reasons we're probably here. So how do I build a Copilot plugin? We have a couple different options. We're going to focus mainly on the pro code development story. That's what we're here for. I've got, again, code and demo and stuff like that. But we also have these low code options as well. So there's Power Platform and the Copilot Studio. I've got pro code on the brain apparently. But if we jump back over to that pro code solution, essentially what we're talking about is using like Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code along with supported languages and tools like the Teams Toolkit to build a message extension. Now, message extensions. I saw a couple people raise their hands when they had that. The nice thing with this is if you have an existing message extension that's bot-based, you're really close to having the ability to deploy that as a plugin already with very, very little work. There's just a couple pieces that you need to kind of make sure are there. High level, what they are is the correct manifest version. It needs to be version 1.16. That gets you kind of the latest bells and whistles and fun features that come with a Copilot plugin. The next piece is, as part of your bot registration, you need to make sure that you have the Microsoft 365 channel added. So Teams channel would be added as part of your Teams message extension. But if you add the M365 channel, what that does is it actually lights it up within Outlook, but Copilot as well. And so that's an important piece there, making sure that your client is added into that bot registration as well. I'll show all of this in a demo in a little bit. The third part is making sure that message extensions are enabled in your environment. Pretty simple, but I've seen it be missed before, so I'm gonna point it out. And then the last piece, fairly obviously, I think is Copilot licenses, right? You're not gonna have access to it without a license. It wouldn't be a Copilot session if we didn't mention Copilot Studio, at least a little bit. We're not diving deep into this at all. Again, this is kind of the pro code story. We're gonna use Visual Studio and look at some code and things like that. But just really calling out the fact that Copilot Studio is there. It's an end-to-end conversational AI platform, allowing you to extend Microsoft Copilot by building plugins using that low-code kind of structure. Additionally, you can build your own custom Copilot through there as well, which is kind of another story to all of this. But again, just kind of calling this out, we've had several sessions that I know of so far that have touched base on this. Cam up front had one yesterday where he did a pretty awesome demo, actually diving into how it works and kind of the UI and things like that. So again, just kind of calling that out. So with that said, everybody hold their breath because we're going to do a live demo. Essentially what I'm going to do is show a demo that our dev advocates team has created. It is going to look at just a SharePoint list that has a handful of products in it. So we are essentially using a message extension or building a message extension that's going to connect up via Graph API to that SharePoint list, and that's the API that we're going to be making requests against. And I'm showing this sample solutions gallery. The URL to this is in a slide a little bit later, but you can get to this exact same code, jump in, look at it, deploy it in your environments, and play around with it if you would like. And just to kind of show you how to get there really quickly, over on the left, if we choose Copilot for Microsoft 365 and we scroll down a little ways, right here, this product support plugin for Microsoft Copilot, that's what we're actually looking at. And I'll open it up real quick just so we can kind of see it. It lives in GitHub. It does an actually really nice job. Oh, sorry about the dark mode. It defaults to that, and I forgot to switch this one over. So we won't spend much time here, but essentially it does a pretty good job of walking you through what exactly you need to do. There's a summary of what it's going to do. It has the prerequisites. In this case, this demo is built using Visual Studio. It's .NET C#. It was scaffolded using the Teams Toolkit. So it's all the pieces are there. We've made it kind of as simple as possible to get this up and running. And again, these instructions are really, really great. We've got minimal path to awesome, and so it really does walk you through it really well. The SharePoint list that we're connecting up to can actually be deployed using the SharePoint lookbook repository. It's pretty easy to deploy that and get it set up. What you're deploying, if I jump over here, is basically this SharePoint site. And there's a couple things that I'm going to point out that'll end up being important a little bit later on. So we have a handful of just products in our catalog here. And then we have this retail category, and you'll see it's enterprise and consumer. Just remember enterprise and consumer for a little bit later. It'll make sense, I promise. And finally, we have all the pictures associated with these, and so that ends up being important because we're actually going to pull that as part of our code and have that show up on the adaptive card as well. So let's jump over to Visual Studio here, and I'll start kind of walking through a couple of the pre-configuration pieces that we need. So the first part here is this env.local file. So I've already got it kind of pre-deployed, so this is built out with information. The important part, at least for me when I was deploying it, is just making sure that the SharePoint hostname and the SharePoint site URLs are correct. If those aren't put in there correctly or you forget them, everything's going to fail or won't be able to connect up to where it needs to be. So just make sure those are updated. Once that's done, the main piece to our code, before we were deploying anything, is really this. It's not the main piece of the code. It's the the plugin story. So it's the information that we're giving to teams is this manifest file. And there's a couple pieces of this that I want to point out. The name, which right now is just kind of a variable, but if I hover over it, you'll see it's Contoso products. So when we actually build this and sideload it, it's going to use the Contoso products name in there. And we have this description. These fields are used by Copilot when you deploy it to determine whether this plugin is able to help in any way, shape, or form. And so right now, if you make this description as kind of verbose as possible, it really improves the usability of the plugin within Copilot. If we look at it a little bit further, we have this array that kind of has our actions associated with it. And so we really have just one action. It's this query. It's the ability to search. And underneath that, it has two essentially parameters that go along with it. You'll see product name and target audience. So product name is what you will see through just the native Teams message extension or Outlook message extension experience, because they only support single parameters. With Copilot, we have this target audience as well. So we can actually use additional parameters. It supports multi-parameters. And so we'll see that. And we're going to actually use this target audience as part of our demo. Now, in the SharePoint list, I pointed out the fact that we had consumer and enterprise listed as there. For the target audience, under the description, you can see we're actually doing some mapping. We're saying, consumer products are sold to individuals, enterprise products are sold to businesses. And so we're trying to proactively provide some intent there. So if I ask a question about individuals, Copilot has the information to be able to map that to the fact that we mean business customers. And so again, just pointing that out as part of the manifest, and hopefully we'll be able to see that in action a little bit later if things behave and work correctly. Moving on, we scaffolded everything using the Teams toolkit. We are then going to use the Teams toolkit to actually deploy all the backend services to our Azure environment. So I'll pseudo do it. I don't want to, I've already kind of pre-done it just to make it available for the demo here without having to wait for a lot of deployment processes. But as part of this, there's kind of three main things that I want to point out. So the first part is this Azure bot.bicep file. And what that is doing is it's configuring the bot registration. So it's the information that we're going to actually send out and create that bot in Azure with. And if we look at it, you can see it's actually creating a couple different channels. So the first one here is this Teams channel right here. The second one is that Microsoft 365 channel that I was talking about. So we need to make sure that both of those are there. That's what's going to enable this to work within Copilot. And then the final piece is the information to connect up to Graph API. So you can see we have the scope in here at sites.readWriteAll. That's what we'll end up using as our permissions for that lookup. We also are pushing out a couple of app registrations. Let me see, that's under Intra. So we've got this bot manifest. This is the app registration for the bot itself. And then we have an app registration for the Graph API requests that we're going to be doing. And again, the Teams toolkit actually packages this all up and pushes it out for us as part of this process. The next thing that I kind of want to dive into that's important is the dev tunnel. So what we're doing is I'm actually running this locally. We're going to use this dev tunnel to actually, deploy it, and then it will kind of manage the communication between the bot service in Azure and my laptop here. And so we can use kind of the native functionality within Visual Studio here. If you look, there's dev tunnels. I've got one configured already, but if you don't have one, it needs to be a public dev tunnel in order for this to work, and you can just create one. Once that is created, essentially we're going to be using this bot controllers.cs that sets up the API controller for us. So you'll see there's a API/messages kind of endpoint, and that's what we are communicating back and forth to. And this just kind of facilitates that. So down here at the bottom, we have kind of the adapter that's actually submitting the requests to the actual code, and it's facilitating all of that. And so that's just kind of what's going on here. Now, I mentioned that I kind of pre-staged all of this, so I don't have to do this, but in order to actually build this, if you come to Teams Toolkit, and prepare the Teams app dependencies, that's what will actually push all the registration and the app registrations and the bot configuration out to Azure. So again, I've done this all just to try to save us a little bit of time. And so now what I can do is actually kick this off. So I want to make sure that I've got kind of everything set up correctly here. And I'm going to start debugging mode. And so what we should see here is this kickoff, and it's going to open up a new window and sign me in automatically into my development environment. Yeah, so Fabian up front was just saying that it uses Teams Toolkit to do this for you, and that is one of the super benefits of Teams Toolkit, is it does a lot of the heavy lifting for you. Really, all you have to do is kind of plug in the pieces that you want, and then it takes care of the rest. It's not necessary to do that. You can actually go manually do all of that, and if I actually, before we run over here, if I jump over here, I can actually look at my bot profile. This is in Azure. This is the bot that I've created. And if I go to channels, you can see, there we go. We've got Microsoft 365 and we've got Microsoft Teams. I don't know why that's saying there's issues. And under configuration, you can see we are connecting to Microsoft Graph. Again, you can actually come in here and add additional OAuth connection settings. If I look at service providers, we have a whole bunch here. So you can actually configure this, this route if you would like to as well. But we've already added the Microsoft Graph connector. And so that's what's facilitating kind of the authentication and everything as well. So back over to here. So this is what I was hoping to see. It opened up this new window, and it's basically got my plugin that we were just kind of looking at, and I can add this, and it's just basically side loading. So when you go to do this, make sure that you have an account that has permissions to be able to do this, and that side loading is enabled on your environment. But now we've got my message extension deployed, and on the back end, if we kind of look at it here, it's running. So the tunnel's set up, we're connected up, and everything, fingers crossed, should work at this point. So again, we mentioned it's a Teams message extension. So let's look at that experience just really quick before we jump into the Copilot side. So if I look at this, you can see I've got my Contoso products, and what essentially is happening here, and we'll look at the code a little bit. But it's making a request back to to my laptop via that bot, the bot that we deployed. And you can see the first thing that it's saying is, hey, you're going to need to sign into this. So we'll authenticate. We should be, we're prompted with consent. So I have to just basically accept the permissions that it's saying it needs on my behalf. Once that's done, it should, there we go, we've got content returned. Now, again, we'll look at the code a little bit, but I want to jump back over here just to point out the fact that as part of our code, we have this kind of nifty debug information that we're putting out there. So we can see the initial request was just kind of a null request. It's give me all the information that's out there. We can see the request URL. So right down here is the Graph API URL that it created to actually make that request against Graph API, pull down the information we need. We wrap it up in an adaptive card, and we present it right here. And so that is doing what we need to do. And if we click on one of these to add it into the message, And I don't know why my screen's so far down there, but you can see here, we've got, the product, some information. It's telling us it's a consumer product. It's got the picture embedded in that. And we have the view and edit buttons. So the message extension appears to be working like we want it. So that's, step one is done in the, in the demo. So
real quick.
Yep.
What's not super obvious from the flow that we just saw is that the sign-in button, Teams supports single sign-on. And so when you see the sign-in button, that was actually occurring because this is the first instance that the user tried to use the app and the permissions had not been consented to.
Yeah.
If you're, looking to develop this for, again, a broader use case, right? Single sign-on does work, so the user doesn't have to get prompted. And the workaround to that really is to have the administrator pre-consent the applications, or after the user's consented the first time, they will no longer have to see the sign-in challenge.
Yeah.
It'll just work naturally. We showed the consent prompt on purpose, but just know that you have single sign-on available to you.
Yeah, with that kind of in mind, if we take this a little bit step further, another step, I guess, and I'm going to create a new message just to kind of show it in a second option here. So I'll be sending Fabian a message here. I can open up this message extension. I can click it. And at this point, I've already been authenticated. We have the access token in the background. Everything's being taken care of for us. So I didn't have to sign in again. Everything's there. And that will remain this way until I sign out and remove my consent to that application. So that's kind of at least somewhat showing that in action. We'll see the same thing in Copilot. So we're consented to, everything's good. We won't have to run the actual authentication. And that's actually part of our code. One of the first things that it does is it looks to see if you have an access token. If not, it will run through either the first sign-in experience, or it will use like a refresh token to get a new token and continue on the session that way. All right, so we're into Copilot. We need to open up the plugin flyout, and we can see my side-loaded plugin is here, so I'm going to enable that. And once that's enabled, now I have the ability to actually prompt Copilot. So let's see if I can get this prompt right here. So we're going to say find Contoso products aimed at individuals. Again, our SharePoint list had enterprise and consumer. Thank you. Yep.
Somebody's paying attention.
Yeah. So I've asked for individuals, and you can just kind of assume that that's the way my thought process is going at any given moment. And so it's submitting the request. It's hopefully going to return us some results back here in a second. Yep, it looks like it's working. So. Hooray that the main part of the demo worked. So here we can see we've got the results back, and once it finally finishes loading, we can look at the references, and you'll see we have our plugin, are kind of the top three results here. We also have a couple other things. There's a GitHub that's a message. Graph connector. Thank you. Got stuck in a buffering loop there for a second. When we hover over this is where that adaptive card comes up. And so I can now see, again, it's the same adaptive card that the message extension was using, but now it's embedded within our Copilot results. And from here, I can, click on the action. So I'll view this, and it's going to take me just directly to that SharePoint list. And I have the ability to kind of update, edit, and do whatever I need to here. But we mentioned that they support actions. And so again, if I look here, I have this edit button. And so if I click this, it's going to open up a form, hopefully, there we go, a form, and it allows me to kind of interact with it from here. So I'm going to change this Mark 8 from consumer to enterprise, and I'm going to save that. And in the back end, it's doing an API request. So it's not a GET request, it's a post or patch request probably. Using the Graph API back to that SharePoint API. So now, if I jump back over here and I refresh this page, we should see it switch from, It's now enterprise. And so, that just shows the actions piece of this working. So that is a message extension that's been deployed as a Copilot plugin, and everything working within Copilot. So the last thing that I want to do is just kind of run through the kind of main function in all of this. Just high level, I'm not going to dive too deep into it. That can end up being pretty boring. So I'm going to actually stop this just so we're not running that and give us a little bit more space here. But as we mentioned, the first kind of chunk that it's doing right here is the authentication piece. So we're basically checking to see if there's a token. If there's not a token, we'll run through that whole auth process to make sure that there is the token. And then the rest of the code here, the main part of the code here is really just setting up that API request. And so I pointed out those debug queries. So right here, this kind of shows really well what's actually happening. So the bot service, it was actually able to determine what we needed to do. It passed that in. And so we're making an actual request based on the consumer tag instead of individual like we had typed into the prompt. Additionally, you can see the query filter that it created is going to be, retail category equals consumer. And then it actually shows us the full URL. So you could kind of go dive into that a little bit and see it as well. But that's actually what's happening in this part of the code right here. We're actually building that query out. The next piece that I want to do is right here. We're basically setting up the Graph API connection to actually make that request. So we request out and we get the SharePoint sites, and then we use some of that information to basically get the products. And then we start building out the adaptive cards for the results. As part of the adaptive cards, just to kind of call it out, again, that's something that we have the ability to create and configure however we want. There it is, adaptive cards. And so if we look at it, this product is kind of the main one. This is the results. And so this is the code on the left, and this is what it ends up looking like on the right. It's pretty neat to have this in Visual Studio where you can see kind of side by side what's going on. And then we have the edit form as well. So these are the two adaptive cards that we've created for this specific app. One to kind of present the content and the other one to actually edit the content. And so, hopefully that kind of shows you, high level without going line by line the code, what's actually going on here. Luckily the demo worked. I'm pretty thrilled about that. And with that, I'll get it switched back over to the PowerPoint, but I'm going to hand it off to Eunice, who's going to dive pretty deep into kind of the backside architecture, what's actually happening from there.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the flows. One of the most common questions we get is how do I know Copilot's not really looking at my data? And what really happens when Copilot picks my plugin or my skill or how do I know what data source? So this diagram breaks it down in pretty good detail. I describe Copilot, and actually most LLMs, as a hyper-intelligent golden retriever, in which they have an understanding of an object, but they don't necessarily understand all the nuances. So what actually happens when the user sits down at Copilot, types in the prompt, so we do multiple passes of assessment with the language model. And the first pass is to determine intent. So the only thing that happens in the first pass is did you want to search? What do you want to search for? Is this did it match a web search? Does it match one of my skills? So it actually goes through and tries to pull out and match a skill or a connector or a data source that you have. That list of skills and data sources is owned by us, and it's populated basically from several sources, but for plugins and connectors, it'll be what plugins you have installed, what Teams apps that have messaging extensions installed, as well as what connectors are enabled for your environment. All of this maps to any controls you have in your environment already. So your Teams app policies and your integrated apps policies also apply. It's all on a per user level. Goes through the list and tries to pick a skill. More on that in just 1 second. Goes through the list, tries to pick a skill. It actually does a second pass after that, which you can see over on box number 4 on that thing. Within the skill itself, you as the developer will have a chance to define parameters, what it is exactly that the plugin does and what you need for your plugin to work. And so you saw that in the target audience, right, in the product name. So we do a second pass at that point, and we go look in the text for target audience, or a word that looks like target audience. And we also look for a word that sort of looks like product name, and we try and pull it out, and that's what gets sent to your plugin. At this point, if you're watching the logs in your plugin, you'll see the invoke come in, and you'll see the 2 parameters pass. You take that, you do what you're going to do with it, send your response back, right? That lands in Copilot, and the third pass occurs at that point in which Copilot looks at the response, and it looks at the original question, and it tries to smush the answer into a format that matches the question, right? And this is where AI gets really funky, because if you ask like a negative question and the answer is in the positive form, you can flip that around and answer it correctly, right? This last stage sometimes trips people up, because if your descriptions in your app don't match the answer format that you're sending back, then Copilot can, hyper-intelligent Labrador Retriever, throws up its hands and says like, apples aren't a product, apples are fruit. Like, this isn't, I'm throwing it out. I couldn't find an answer. So you do find some amount of that, which actually takes me to, here's the we'll talk about the developer debug tools here, but you can see this flow here on the slide. Again, it's looking for all your enabled plugins. And in this scenario, I kept it short because I only enabled one. So you can see the whole list of plugins. If you're more than one enabled, you see more than one in there. And then of all the plugins enabled, it's going to look at the descriptions in there. And it's like the query was a search query. It says, I found for this plugin, there's a search function, and it looks like it matches. So that's the second row that you see on there. And here's the one I actually picked to run of the ones that did match. That's the third row. And then the fourth row is like what actually happened when I tried to run. And on that fourth row, you may see multiple queries if it made multiple attempts. That's totally normal. So we're getting to the portion of this conversation where for people late says, I kind of mildly threatened, raise your hands, ask your questions, come up front, because you're probably going to have to shout if you're in the back. We're going to talk a little bit about how to write a good plugin now that you understand the flow of plugin selection, skill selection, and then the pass where you pull parameters out. This is available today in your manifest. We did not take a deep dive look at the app manifest, but the app manifest is a construct that is used for Teams apps and MetaOS apps. Within your app manifest, you will have a section to define your message extension in the commands node. And again, what is new as of Ignite? Yeah, what's new as of Ignite is that you will be able to define up to 5 parameters per command. We already supported 10 commands per message extension. And within each parameter, you can actually add an additional node by the name of semantic description, which you see in the second and the third blocks. Semantic description allows you to separate the description you provide to Copilot versus the text that you're showing to the end user. If there is no semantic description, it just fails over to your regular description for plugin matching. But this is where, as a developer, you can really tune and train your model. You get 2,000 characters. Good things to do is include information about what the AI should be scanning for when it's looking for a parameter. You can get pretty specific. So you can say, this should be a GUID string, 7 characters, followed by a dash, followed by 2 characters, followed by a dash, followed by 5 characters. But if you see like zeros in anywhere, it's not a valid GUID. That's not a valid GUID. Don't use it. So you can get actually very, very specific. You can put upper limits, forbidden characters, things like that. The nuance between parameters and commands is another thing that as a developer, you have control over. If we walk through the skill selection process, again, it looks for matching plugins, then it looks for matching commands or functions, depending on who you talk to. Then it looks for matching parameters. So if you have lots of plugins, all with generically search in their description, or if you have one plugin with 4 commands that all say search in their description, you're increasing the chances that you're actually going to make your own life harder, because you will have 4 matches for search, and your odds of getting the wrong one have just gone up. So again, if you're doing a search function, and there's no reason why you would want to separate out what's the type of response that's returned back, right? On your code side, put the parameters in, and then if I prompt, find me a product by the name of, I don't know, what was it? Something.
Mark 8.
Yeah, Marquide. Or find me a product suitable for enterprise use, or find me a Lockheed product suitable for enterprise use. All of those prompts could fit in one command with multiple parameters, right? What we did learn is that, again, let's be honest, we're all learning here, but what we did learn is if you made search for product by name, then search for product by catalog number, and then search for product by, price. And we made them individual commands. The accuracy rate really dropped, significantly, because they were all searches, right? And then Copilot's contextual, so it may find a bunch of parameters in there that match name, catalog number, and target audience. So then it's well, I have all of them. I'm just going to pick one. Let's see which one I get. So that's semantic description, super helpful, helping you get your.
Yeah, we've got a question over here.
Oh, go ahead. So I'm going to repeat the question just so the mic picks it up. The question was, what's the best way if you're going to try and combine multiple searches into a single description? Yeah. So I have seen people use OR, right? The other thing to consider is user behavior. There's 2 schools of thoughts. You train your users on how to write good prompts, and then there's the other school of thoughts. You can be a little bit predictive about how you think users are going to write that prompt. What's available today and what's not super well documented is today, plugins require what we call a specific invocation. So if you want to find a Jira ticket, you have to say, find me a Jira ticket, or as Matt showed, find a product from my catalog specifically. So how that plugin match occurs is actually by looking at the description of the plugin, the title and the description of the plugin itself. If you say, just find me a ticket, the odds that it matches on something named Jira are very low, and you'll find that it doesn't work. So the cleverness in there is finding the keywords you think the user is going to use in their base prompt. You want to find one that's unique enough that it's not going to cross-match with your other plugins. So again, come back to Jira again. Find me a Jira ticket, super specific. And so then the description hypothetical could be this plugin find things in Jira, and then your semantic description is this is the function to use if the user wants to find any object in Jira. Acceptable parameters are X, Y, Z, and for each parameter, here are the expected inputs, and here are the limits, and here's what we will and won't accept. Does that make sense? Yeah. Alrighty.
The low-code Copilot Studio shows up as a plugin. Are we competing against their skills when you do a skills search?
To a certain extent, yes. So again, that first, I'm gonna see if I know how to go backwards. You will again, the enabled plugins up at the top, that will show you all the plugins in your plugin file that's got the toggle set over to blue, over to on. So if each Copilot Studio plugin, I mean, you can turn them on or off as you need, but like they will all show up there as well. So good question. Example prompts. So now we get to the other half of the discussion is like, there's only so much you can do as a developer because like humans are unpredictable, and also there's a lot of everyone else compared to the number of developers working on your semantic description. So the other thing you can do today, again in your manifests, is define what we call sample prompts. Sample prompts are basically like just encourage users to think about how they're prompting. So you can give them good examples on how to get started. Here's what it would look like in your manifest. And they show up, right, when they're, again, you show it on the previous screen, but they basically show up. You can see that on the left when the person first installs or first enables the prompt. We'll hang around for questions if there are more questions, but I'm at a time check, so. Feel free to take a picture of the information on the slide. Everything you see today, you can do. It's available to you. Just download the samples, edit the manifest.
So just by a show of hands, I think we asked it once before, but I want to see it again. Who has developer tenants through the developer program? How many of those are enabled for Copilot? None. Oh, one. We got one. All right. All right. So that is kind of by default. We're making some changes. So on the right side here, you will see that those developer tenants, we are kind of, again, making changes to them, and we intend to be able to have them get the bit flipped to allow you to basically purchase Copilot through those environments. And that's, at this point, kind of tentatively scheduled for a little bit later this fall, September time range. So just kind of keep that in mind if you're looking for a developer tenant to kind of start playing with some of these things. The other options that you have is if you are an ISV, we actually run a program, our team does a private preview program where you can join our technology adoption program and request a tenant. And essentially what we do is we kind of do the back end work manually to get you one of these developer tenants with the bit flipped to where you can purchase Copilot. So you still have to purchase Copilot for the $30 user a month for kind of the minimum of a year. And that's going to be kind of the same across all the options. But that is kind of the existing option that you have now, or just all up purchasing a tenant. So just kind of calling that out, because that's a question we get quite a bit, is like, hey, where do I go to start playing with this stuff? How do I get a developer tenant? And so there are some things in the works for that.
Thank you very much for attending. We appreciate your time. Hope you had a great conference.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.